Donald Trump has zero foreign policy experience. Negotiating a hotel deal in another country is not foreign policy experience. Jeb Bush has no foreign policy experience, period. And I'm an incredible admirer of him and of his family. I thank God that George W. Bush was president of the United States instead of Al Gore on September 11, 2001.
Marco Rubio on the campaign trail in South Carolina, criticizing his rivals as he tries to drum up support. But that fifth-place finish in New Hampshire could prove problematic. And who finished in fourth? Why, his good Florida friend, Jeb Bush. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the former co-chairman of Jeb Bush for Governor, Ed Pozzuoli. He's president of the Tripp Scott Law Firm, laying down the law by Skyping in from Fort Lauderdale tonight. Ed, we appreciate your time. And you just heard Marco with a slice of rhetorical flattery for the Bush political family, and yet he made a serious charge about Jeb having no foreign policy experience. Are South Carolinians going to buy that?
No, they're not. South Carolinians aren't going to buy that. There are a lot more questions swirling around Marco Rubio right now than Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush is ready. I think that he has grown in the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, JD, as a candidate. Now, I mean, you and I let's look at the reality. Whether or not Jeb Bush can position himself as, say, the anti-Donald Trump is really the question. Jeb Bush is a serious candidate who understands the issues, who has a number of military folks backing him, and they have a strong presence in South Carolina. I think that's going to prove out for Jeb next Saturday.
Well, they do in the Low Country, and we had Tara Servatius and Mark Rotterman on here talking about that earlier. But in the upstate and the Midlands, there may be something else at work. However, overall, Ed, the irony that 2 Floridians, the one-time mentor and his junior partner in the state house, now squared off, it's more than passing curious, is it not, to have this occur in South Carolina?
It's very curious, but also remember, they're vying for the nomination of our party and the likely next president of the United States. So, in South Carolina, traditionally, JD, is bare knuckles politics. So when they're talking about one another, they're not talking, personally. I think they're talking about how they see the comparisons and contrasting experience that they both have. And look, let's be blunt about it. Marco brings to the table a great story, and he's a great communicator from a speech standpoint. Jeb Bush brings that executive experience and, frankly, a proven record of accomplishment as governor of the state of Florida on a very conservative and principled basis. And so voters will have an opportunity to compare those two. But those are not the only 2 in the race, and I would warn both Marco and Jeb. Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are strong in South Carolina, and they are ultimately your ultimate competition for the nomination.
And that's what we heard on the ground from folks in the Carolinas a bit earlier. But Ed, there is another endeavor, maybe not on the up and up like politics, but then again, people are skeptical of politics. You've heard the old expression in a certain family business, nothing personal, just business. I'm gonna step away from that to talk about the family perspective. Jeb is going to bring in George W. Barbara's been on the trail. In South Carolina, and I was there to see firsthand the affinity that then Vice President George H.W. Bush had with the people of the Palmetto State. Are you hoping South Carolinians have long memories? And what does it mean to have W down there helping out in South Carolina?
Well, let's put it this way. South Carolina has a long, prideful military tradition. And George W., particularly in comparison to whom we have in the White House today, is viewed by the military, both active and retired military folks, as somebody they take pride in calling their commander-in-chief. And so I think there's a lot of goodwill for President George W. Bush. There's a lot of goodwill for the Bush family generally. I mean, JD, who doesn't love Barbara Bush?
Well, Barbara, between Mrs. Bush's story time and for purposes of full disclosure, back when I was in a tough race for re-election, Barbara came out to do a luncheon on behalf of Miss Mary, my bride, and it may have helped make the difference back then. But it is interesting about politics. I recall back in the mid-'80s, groundbreaking for the Strom Thurmond Institute at Clemson University. And then you turn around by 1992, there's Senator Thurmond endorsing Bob Dole over the man who keynoted the groundbreaking one, then Vice President George H.W. Bush. It'll all come out in the wash. It'll be interesting to watch. And Ed Pozzuoli, we will continue to get your comments in terms of Team Jeb. Now, what do you think? What's going to happen in South Carolina? Two Floridians squaring off, or will it go to Cruz or Trump? Send me your comments at newsmaxtv.com/comments. Back with more right after this.